Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review. Today from McFarlane Toys in their DC Multiverse line, we are featuring this beautiful 2-pack with the Green Knight versus Killer Croc. Okay, so today is May 27th, 2025, and I bought this recently at my local Target. The price of this thing was, it was ridiculous. I want to say it was marked for $72 here in the States, which is nuts. Like, for example, a few months ago, I bought that Batman Kong 2-pack, and that thing, I think, was marked for $69. And the Kong figure is gigantic, much larger than the Killer Croc. But, you know, with the recent tariffs and all the other price increases, I don't know, I just thought it was crazy. And this was a 2-pack I did not want to pass up on. It was the second time I saw this in the store. The first time I saw this in the store, I'm like, you know what, I think I could pass on it. But then after a little bit of deliberation, I kind of thought, you know what, I kind of do want this. So even though it's going to cost a lot of money, I do want that Grim Knight figure again. So no pun intended, I decided to bite the bullet. All right, so this is a wonderful looking 2-pack. It's a great opportunity for many people to get their hands on the Grim Knight. This figure came out years ago, and it was like really hard to find. You know, I got lucky and I came across it in the wild, but for many people, this action figure just escaped them. And to make matters worse, it was one of those kind of figures where I don't think McFarlane could have like re-released it if they wanted to, just because of the accessories. So if you're a longtime collector of McFarlane's DC Multiverse figures, you'll remember that a lot of the early figures, some of them included like weapons, like guns and stuff. But then there was a certain point early on when all of a sudden that kind of stopped. And then none of the McFarlane figures had guns anymore. And people told me it was because I think DC or Warner Brothers kind of mandated they didn't want guns being included with their action figures. So with that in place, you know, this figure never saw the light of day again until now. And it's kind of interesting because, you know, McFarlane's on the verge of like losing the DC license. And there's some action figures like this one where all of a sudden they're including like firearms again. You know, for example, I think it's the deluxe Batman Year 2 figure. It's the Batman that kind of has the holster on his chest and it comes with a pistol. So this is great. You know, if you missed out on the Grim Knight the first time, here you go. The only downside is that the price of this 2-pack is very expensive. But in my opinion, at least for me, I feel it's worth it. Even though I do have the first version of the Grim Knight, I do appreciate the repaint. I think this color scheme for me looks a lot better than the all black one. And the Killer Croc figure, surprisingly, it might look the same as the Arkham Asylum one, but there's enough differences here that, you know, if you're thinking about pulling the trigger, it's kind of warranted. On the back of the box, we have a beautiful illustration. We kind of have the Grim Knight here in the very Jim Lee pose. You know, if you're a comic book reader, you might recognize this as paying homage to the Jim Lee Batman that's looking over Gotham City. But instead, this is the Grim Knight. Unfortunately, I don't know who the artist is on this one. On the other half, we have Killer Croc with Batman looming in the background. When I first saw this image, I want to say the artwork might have been done by artist Tony Daniel, but I might be wrong. And I'm assuming this might be New 52 era Batman that we see back there. Right, so this box is huge, and there are a lot of ties holding these figures together. So I'm just going to pause the video for a second, and when I'm back, I'll have the figures fully unboxed, and we can get started with the review. Okay, so here I am. Both figures are unboxed. All right, so one thing you'll notice included in the box is this really neat cardboard insert. It's kind of like a swamp bayou kind of deal. It's awesome. So if you need a backdrop for your display shelf, this is awesome for Killer Croc and Batman. Or if you're into like G.I. Joe Classified series, you know, with the Dreadnoks, you know, they always hang out in the swamp and whatnot. Again, you could throw Zartan in here and it looks cool. But yeah, cool little backdrop. I'm pretty stoked on this. Some of the other accessories, of course, we get the trading cards often included with all the McFarlane figures. We have both the Grim Knight, which we see right here, and a small little bio talking about the Grim Knight. If you're unfamiliar with the Grim Knight, it's kind of like, think of Batman meets the Punisher, but from like a dark multiverse. And that's pretty much who the Grim Knight is. Over here we have Killer Croc's trading card, and he's taking on Bane. Now that I think of it, wait, what is this? So this depicts Killer Croc from the dark multiverse. But I think this image here might be from City of Bane, I think. I might be wrong on that also. We have two display bases right here. And Batman, here are the accessories that come with the Grim Knight. He comes with this pile of weapons that's strapped to his back. You know, it's almost like he's preparing for the apocalypse, like Sarah Connor in Terminator. And then here's more of his accessories for the Grim Knight. All right, so let's get started on the figures. We have the Grim Knight and we have Killer Croc. You can see the difference in size. Killer Croc is gigantic. The Grim Knight stands in at about 7¼ inches, whereas Killer Croc comes in at about 9½. Very large action figure. For a size comparison, here is the figure next to some other ones. We have Malefic Spawn from the McFarlane Mortal Kombat line. You know, it's kind of within the same scale as the DC Multiverse figures. We have the McFarlane designed Batman. This is one of the older McFarlane figures, and back then the scale was a lot larger. So you can see he towers over the Grim Knight, much larger figure. But that was the case with the early McFarlane DC figures. You know, the scale was a little bit more inconsistent, with some figures just being really, really tall, like this fella right here. Let's examine Grim Knight first. So if you have the first version of this figure, you know, count yourself lucky. It was very difficult to find. I do appreciate this new one, though. I do like the color scheme a lot more. The first version of the Grim Knight, you know, whereas all this is gray, it was black. This updated version has some brown paint highlighting his harness here. You can see the brown underneath, and then some of the brown laces holding down the magazine cartridges. Also different is the knee pads. On the first version of the figure, it was silver knee pads against black pants, whereas this is gray pants with black knee pads. And for whatever reason, I just think the black, as good as it looks, the gray just looks a little bit more striking. You can see a lot more of the details, a lot more of the accessories, and just all the layers of pouches and straps and harnesses. You know, the contrast of those black elements against the gray, you know, they really stand out. And I think it just makes the figure appear more detailed than the other one. You know, the other one is just very monochromatic with the black. But this one's nice. You know, it still retains the silver emblem on his chest like the black version had. But this one just looks cool. You know, the scarf sticks out more with it being black against the gray. And then, of course, there's the accessories. We have all these weapons that are kind of like strung together. You know, it's very impractical, but it's a comic book, so. And that plugs into his back. And he's ready to go to war. You know, it's like I said, you know, Grim Knight, it's essentially, you know, Punisher meets Batman. You know, he's a lot more lethal, a lot more, I guess, dangerous. he's more committed to, like, getting the job done and, you know, putting a fork into it. You know what I mean? You know, he's not going to let anything linger. He's kind of all about absolutes. And that's the Grim Knight for you. Awesome figure. Again, if you've missed out on the first release, this second one is well worth the purchase. Again, you are paying a lot of money for the 2-pack, but This is a beautiful figure. It's really something else. I like this a lot. All right, so that brings us to the main event. We're going to take a look at Killer Croc here. Now, when I first saw this at the store, my first impression was, I have this figure, I don't need it. And then, you know, after I thought about it, I'm like, I changed my mind. I think I do want it. You know, then I went back to the store during a grocery run. I'm like, I'm just going to pick this up. And I picked it up, and then I was standing in the checkout line, and I was just looking at this, and I'm like, you know what? This looks a lot different. You know, of course, the color scheme is different. The original one had orange pants, and the flesh tone was a lot different. But then the more I looked at it, I'm like, this is missing stuff. And there's stuff about this that I think this kind of looks a little bit better and much more in line with the comic book. So I do have this figure in my collection, but right now it's in a closet underneath a bunch of boxes, so I can't get to it right away. So I just printed this image out. It's one of the stock photos from McFarlane. And this was the first release of Killer Croc. It depicts Killer Croc as he appeared in the video game Arkham Asylum. And if you played the game, you'll remember there's, like, I think within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the game, Batman's walking through Arkham Asylum. And then this freight elevator comes up, and then Killer Croc comes out, and he's gigantic. And, you know, that's essentially this figure right here. The figure's a beast. And this is pretty much what he looks like in the game. You know, he has shackles on his wrists and legs. He has that giant shackle collared around his neck. And it's a beast of a figure. It's beautiful, and it looks awesome. But while I was standing in line, and the more I looked at this, I'm like, this looks a lot different than the other one. So, besides being different in color, one thing you'll notice is that the heads are actually different. This one has a much more elongated head with the nostrils turned up. This guy here, he kind of has a much more rounder head and a much more stockier, pudgier nose. You'll also notice he's missing the collar around his neck. Of course, the flesh tone is a lot different, whereas this one was kind of like a light gray with some like green highlighting. This one is a very rich and vibrant green with like yellow highlighting, and it just looks really, really beautiful. I think this color choice here just looks phenomenal. The original one had the orange pants. They're kind of tattered. This one has the blue one, so it looks more like denim. And another striking difference is if you look at the arms here, this guy has shackles on both forearms, whereas this one, they're completely gone. And if you look close enough, you can kind of see where the shackles used to be, because there's kind of like a faint line above the scales that doesn't completely match the rest of the scale work here. And about from here to here is where the old shackles were. And that's how it is on both arms. And then you'll also notice that he doesn't have the shackles around the ankles like this one does right there. So it's a very different figure, you know, even though it's making reuse of like the torso, the arms, and the legs. I think with the difference in color scheme and the omission of like the shackles, it looks almost like an entirely different character. So for me, I kind of feel like, you know, this is worth the purchase. It looks beautiful. It looks great. Even if you have the first one already, you know, you can easily just take this figure and migrate it into your Marvel Legends and just say it's like some sort of, you know, irradiated version of the Hulk or the Abomination. You know, kind of fits within that family, especially with it being green. But it's a great looking version of Killer Croc. You know, I think it's a little bit more in line with what you see in the comic books as opposed to the one that we saw in the video game, where, you know, they kind of took some more liberties with it. They kind of wanted to give it a different approach, maybe make it look a little bit more realistic. But this one here, it's great. Don't sleep on this figure. Again, I think this is a fantastic 2-pack. The only thing that's debatable is whether or not it's worth the price. You know, like I said, it wasn't that long ago that I bought that 2-pack with Kong and Batman, and that was like $69. And then you're getting this set for like $72. And then this figure here, it's nowhere near as big as the Kong. So, you know, it's up to you. You know, if you missed out on the Grim Knight and you need him sorely, this is worth a purchase. If you don't have either of these figures, then yeah, it's full on worth it totally. All right, so let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer or subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. All right, later.